Let's rewind the clock to a time before clocks even existed, when human movement was free, unburdened by the lines and systems of control we see today, many encoded in unjust laws. Migration has been essential to our survival and expression of freedom. Our species, Homo sapiens, emerged in Africa over 200,000 years ago, gradually populating the planet in search of food, safety, and sometimes just a change of scenery. Back then, borders were not only non existent, they were unimaginable. The world was defined by natural landscapes, not human imposed lines on a map. In fact, for more than 99% of human history, humans have moved freely across the planet without a single immigration restriction or nation state border in sight. Early humans moved based on necessity, curiosity, and community, not passports, visas, wealth, or skin color. As civilizations emerged in the Nile Valley in Africa, Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley in Asia, long before the rise of early European civilizations such as the Minoans in Crete, people continued to move with relative ease. Some societies, kingdoms, and empires did mark their territories, but these borders were typically designed for military defense or symbolic power rather than to restrict the everyday movement of ordinary people. People traded ideas, goods, and cultures across regions, and movement remained largely fluid. Then came European imperialism and colonialism, a turning point that redefined movement, systems of ownership, and the entire world, fueled by the insatiable and rabid greed for resources, land, labor, and power. European empires carved up the world with complete disregard for the lives, cultures, and sovereignties of the people already living there. European colonialism wasn't just conquest, it was a system of unprecedented violence and control. Whole civilizations were decimated. Hundreds of millions of people were displaced, enslaved, murdered, and terrorized. European powers colonized over 80% of the world, and Britain alone controlled 25% of the world's population and landmass, the largest empire in all of human history. These acts of brutality laid the foundations for the economic inequalities and racial hierarchies we see today. One of the clearest and most devastating examples of this arbitrary division came during the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885. European powers, excluding Africans entirely from decisions about their own lands, sat in a room in Germany and, armed with rulers and pens, redrew the African continent according to their own interests. With complete disregard for the intricate networks of communities, cultures, trade, and ecosystems that had long existed, they divided the continent amongst themselves. Many of these colonial borders remain intact today, dividing families and communities, fueling tensions and conflict, and restricting the free movement of people that have inhabited the continent for hundreds of thousands of years. Colonialism also funded the development of powerful European states. The wealth extracted from colonized lands and peoples didn't just vanish. It built infrastructure like roads, railways, and housing, and funded industries and public institutions such as the NHS and welfare systems in Britain. While Europe's elites enriched themselves beyond measure, and many of their citizens experienced rising living standards, colonized peoples were and continue to be impoverished. This wealth was stolen, extracted under duress, violence, and coercion. The social systems and infrastructure built through the spoils of industrial capitalism and empire are often hailed as progress, but we must ask, progress for whom and at what cost? Especially when the foundations of these gains were built on environmental destruction, human suffering, violent exploitation, and the deliberate underdevelopment and exclusion of colonized peoples. Exclusions that not only persist, but are actively reproduced in today's global order. Settler colonialism isn't just a side effect of empire. It is a deliberate strategy of domination. Tens of millions of Europeans migrated to colonies in the Americas, Australia, Aotearoa, New Zealand, and parts of Africa, often massacring and forcibly displacing indigenous communities in the process. While many settlers fled poverty and conflict in Europe, their arrival brought devastating consequences. From diseases that decimated entire populations to systems of governance and land theft that entrenched systems of white supremacy, including deeply racialized social and economic hierarchies. Between 1815 and 1930 alone, over 60 million Europeans migrated abroad. To this day, the largest intercontinental migration in human history. Many were escaping the endless and bloody wars in Europe, famine, land enclosures, forced industrialization, and rigid class systems that offered little chance of upward mobility. They journeyed across oceans and continents, driven by hope, desperation, and the promise of a better life. This migration profoundly reshaped the world, not just demographically, but politically, economically, and ecologically, in ways that continue to shape global inequalities today. Today's immigration systems are a direct legacy of colonialism. Borders serve to divide rich from poor, white from racialized, global north from global south. While some travel relatively freely, others face bureaucratic barriers, exploitation, and other human rights violations, including detention, deportation, and death. These are not accidents. They are systems of exclusion designed to protect power, wealth, and privilege. From their inception, immigration laws have been rooted in racism. The US-Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, the White Australia Policy, only abolished in 1973, the 1905 Aliens Act in Britain, and eugenics-influenced laws across the West or global North, all aimed to keep out people deemed undesirable. As the British Empire transformed into the so-called Commonwealth, policies were specifically crafted to exclude black and brown citizens from free movement. These laws reflected and reinforced a global system of white supremacy and apartheid. In fact, a UK government report, initially suppressed and only published in September 2024, openly acknowledges and confirms what many have long known. It states in its own words, during the period 1950 to 1981, every single piece of immigration or citizenship legislation was designed at least in part to reduce the number of people with black or brown skin who were permitted to live and work in the UK. Today, millions flee war, poverty, persecution, climate collapse, and environmental destruction, often caused or worsened by colonial legacies. Most come from and remain in the global south. But unlike the tens of millions of Europeans who migrated across continents just a century ago, many even without documents, yet welcomed by colonial powers as settlers, many of today's migrants are met with criminalization, dehumanization, exclusion, and violence by some of the very same powers whose histories are steeped in colonial conquest. They are forced into perilous journeys by a global border regime that continues to privilege whiteness, wealth, and global North or Western citizenship. Over 32,000 people, mostly from Africa and Asia, have died trying to cross the Mediterranean, the deadliest border crossing in the world. The true toll is almost certainly far higher. Europe rightly welcomed millions of Ukrainian refugees fleeing Russian invasion, but why doesn't the same compassion extend to others seeking safety? Would African and Asian men, women, and children forced to make dangerous crossings in unseaworthy boats have been left to drown if they were white, Christian, and European? This isn't just about borders. It's about which lives are valued and whose safety is prioritized. From the earliest immigration controls, rooted in white supremacy and eugenics, to the restrictive policies of today, migration systems have been shaped first and foremost through racialized violence and injustice. These early laws weren't just about regulating movement. They were about defining who belonged and who didn't, based on race and perceived fitness, often used as a proxy to reinforce racial exclusion. The impact of these policies can still be seen in today's systems that reward certain nationalities, skin colors, and passport holders while excluding, punishing, and criminalizing others, especially those from countries and communities historically targeted and marginalized by empire. In recent decades, the European Union and its allies, including the UK, have built what campaigners call Fortress Europe, a heavily policed and militarized border regime designed to keep out the very people whose homes and futures were destabilized by European colonialism and continue to be targeted by modern forms of imperialism and neo-colonialism through war, occupation, debt, arms deals, economic exploitation, political meddling, and geopolitical manipulation. Multi-billion-dollar industries profit from this regime. These include private security firms, arms manufacturers, tech companies selling surveillance equipment, private airlines profiting from deportation contracts, and software companies developing digital identity, data processing, and payment systems for governments, and a growing border externalization regime. Migration is not just managed, it is monetized. What we are witnessing is not just exclusion, it's a global economy built on it. While the privileged are protected and enriched, those made vulnerable by these systems are punished. This is not a failure of the system, it is the system functioning as designed. But resistance has always been part of this story. From rebellions by enslaved people to anti-colonial uprisings, from indigenous land defense to women's suffrage, from resisting border violence to building migrant-led movements today, people have always fought back for freedom, for dignity, and for justice. These struggles often begin at the margins, but they ripple across borders, drawing communities together in shared acts of courage, resistance, and rebellion. Remember this important point. In fact, write it down now. Ready? A world without borders is not only possible, it has already existed for most of human history, and it will exist again whether you like it or not. For those who believe in this world, though the road may be long, walk this path with us. Fight this fight with us. Let's keep moving forward together, because none of us are free until all of us are free. Visit regularise.org and subscribe to our channel to learn more.